This is an information exchange meeting between the Board of Ed and the RTM F&B committee, the public health and safety, and the education committees. There is an agenda out here. I'm going to ask that we switch one of the orders of the agenda. And the way it's going to work is this is not a public hearing. The only questions that will be taken are from members of those three committees. So I'm going to give a brief overview to it. Then the Board of Ed will explain certain things. If there's questions on that topic, please go up to the podium behind Mr. Cini and say your name and what your committee, and we can go from there. The one thing I am going to ask to change, the agenda is call to order, discuss the security capital, then it was the SSOs, but I'm going to move the department head of mental health up for that, up a section, because I think that the first two are important to do. And then at the end, Mr. Rutter will be explaining why the Board of Ed has certain funds to do certain things in this, to pay for certain FTs that they have. And I'm going to give a little bit of a brief overview of the rights of the Board of Ed and what the RTM can and cannot do. So to start with, the first item on the agenda is to discuss a capital request for security for the schools excluding Oxridge, because this was included in the Oxridge project. This request for $335,000 will be RTM education as primary and secondary being public health and safety and F&B. This is not intended to be bonded. And we will discuss this. I will mention something else. While we can ask questions on anything related to security, we should stay away from tactical or logistical questions. All right. If you have one of those, please send it to Duke Deneen, who is the chair. And Duke is not here because he's at a destination wedding, not his, but somebody else's. And so he sends his regrets. But anyhow, so let's open up with the Board of Ed request for the capital security. And I'll give it to Dr. Adley to take it over.
Mr. Davis, good evening. Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to share some of these expenditures. And thank you for taking the time tonight to be present and to engage in the reflection and discourse and to learn more about the actual security improvements. And Mr. Deneen, as Jack said, passes on his regards. I want to just thank Chief Anderson for being here this evening also. The Chief has been instrumental in guiding and also supporting these improvements along the way. So again, I appreciate his time and input along the process. So if I may, just before I answer that particular question, just frame sort of what goes on in terms of security. So predominantly we've got physical security. So that's the infrastructure, the hardware that goes along with security items. You've got personnel. So we have personnel who support our security. So that's from our campus managers that elementary schools all have one, and the middle schools get 2 and 5 at the high school. School resource officers exist, one at the middle school and one at the high school. We also have school liaison officers. Those are police members of the police department that the chief designates to each school that will frequent the school on an regular basis throughout the week. And so they try and make daily visits if they can possibly do that. So those are the types of personnel that support our safety and security. And the protocols then are really what does the staff do when as members of the community, as parents, you go to the school, what protocols do you have to go through, sort of the culture, the practices that actually accompany the personnel and accompany the physical structure? So those are the three sort of buckets. I will share that in consultation with the police chief, the Board of Education annually review the actual emergency procedures and protocols and has an update. These particular recommendations that the board had been discussing for actually some time in detail. The episodes in Uvalde, unfortunate episodes there in Uvalde back in May, we continued that discussion after that. So this just didn't come about just as an ad hoc, spur of the moment reaction. The board had been engaged in ongoing discussions for, I would say, just literally well over a year. So it just what happened, these events came at this particular time. And so we bring forward these recommendations. When we do that, the board was already looking at the concept of school security officers and making improvements to actual doors. So those are the two areas that we thought were critical to do. We thought that it was important to bring them forward now at this particular time and to make those improvements immediately to the schools and to all the schools. So that brings us to the two items, which was the school security officers and the actual capital request for the doors. The doors are essentially, and I'll just go to that slide for you. Essentially, the doors will work with our access control system, which is really these sort of swipe systems for the most part that let you into the door. This is an improvement, and just the improvement really, when you go to an external door, if it's open or ajar, it will give a notification to a member of the administration or to the campus monitors and or to the secretarial staff who will take the appropriate action thereafter. That's our vulnerability point that we felt couldn't wait to make those improvements. We want to make those improvements immediately. And so that's where this appropriation comes through. Oxford already has that built into its security system. And so we'll be doing it in 6 of the 7 schools. I'll share that the building committee for HHR, Holmes, Henley, and Royal, there's a limited capacity of security scope in the educational specifications. We will not be redundant in any expenditures, but this would proceed as quickly as we possibly can do it. It's going to take up to 4 to 6 months to actually get these things in place, but we appreciate the towns, the RTM support of actually putting this improvement in place. So essentially, it's for all the exterior doors in the schools to make that one improvement of notification to the office when it's ajar.
Another way to put this, and had a conversation with somebody who's much more knowledgeable of this, trying to see if he yet made it here. He had a couple of disasters today. But this concept with the doors are really the next step in hardening the buildings themselves and access to the buildings. Many of the issues that have come up is basically because doors were left open or access to it. And so if the goal is to, once you see that something's left ajar, is to have somebody go there and close it, it hardens the access to the building. So
clearly through the physical enhancement, I just want to say, we don't want to make the schools feel like prisons, right? That's not the intent. There's a reasonable level of security, and the doors being open and closed is both an infrastructure thing and also a cultural, practical, in practice, how we do business every day. So we thought this is an important one, important enough as I think if you look over the incidents that have happened throughout the United States here, that there's been enough of breakdown around external doors and so on. So we're trying to do the best that we can to keep those as safe and as locked and as secure as possible.
There is one other thing. when we're talking about things that we're enhancing, which many parents have wanted since my kids are in their 30s, and we had portables when they went to the schools, the temporary portables. One of our security issues is the HHR will be getting rid of our portables, and that is a major enhancement to our security. So just to look at it from that way as well. Are there any questions on this from any members of any of the committees? Jenny, go ahead. You.
I have a question on the access control system. Not really any idea what it means. Is there a project like? Is that like a cloud-based system, an internet-based system where you've got to be updating softwares, or is there a risk that we're going to be looking to replace these anytime, or is it part of it?
Rich, I don't know if you can talk about the annual process for the security. If it needs to be renewed and so on, the bottom line is we're going to renew it. If there are license fees and so on, things for these, but beyond that.
So it's hardware and it's all really programming. So every employee is in the database. You decide which schools they have access to, which schools they don't, what hours are they allowed in, what hours are they not. And then it's also programmed so that if the building's in a lockdown, you have a group of people, which is really just the police department, that actually overrides the lock and they can get in, whereas anybody else can't get in. Occasionally we have to update the actual like black box that you'll see on the door, but there's no real software checks that have that.
Are there any other questions? If not, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda.
Sorry, I wanted to make a comment for the question. Jackie, I'm the public safety. You referenced what happened in Uvalde. I want to be clear that initially it was reported that there was no door there. The teacher had talked about the door. That turned out to be a false report. The door was closed. So I just want to make sure that as we're talking about safety, that we really we're actually keeping track of what the facts in that really was.
My reference wasn't to Uvalde.
Okay.
I appreciate that, Jackie. Mine was more of a reference of the time frame of the sequence, but I can understand how that's a qualification to be made. Thank you.
No other questions, comments? We can move on. I'm on the record that I've consistently supported any addition to the school systems that support the social emotional needs of our children in the schools. I've also been very open that my youngest child is bipolar. And so I tend to have a pretty good understanding of what can and cannot happen. And therefore, when it comes to having a director of mental health, people know where my vote is already. That being said, it's worthwhile to discuss why this was added, what their roles, their job description was in the board minutes a while ago. I forget which September meeting, maybe. But there it was there. So, but I do think it's important. The reason why it's important is even though the RTM and this position is going to be hired, and I'll mention this about all positions, the RTM does not have a say in the Board of Ed whether or not we hire individuals or not. We do not have line item veto. In fact, everything in the Board of Ed budget that we'll see first week in January is really nothing more than a placeholder. When John Bolton was chair a number of years ago, and they were looking to see if the RTM could increase the school budget, I was quoted as saying, the Board of Ed could buy $45 million of crayons if they so desired. Now, they would all go to jail for it, but the fact, and in fact, the budget was only 45 million when I said it. But the fact is that we don't have say on the Board of Ed hirings. We do have line item veto on the Board of Selectmen, different scenario. If any of this had come to the RTM for approval, we were only approving an increase in their appropriation not specifically the people being hired. Even if we said no, the Board of Ed had the right to go and hire these individuals anyway. Where it gets a little touchy on it is when they come, if they're over on their budget and they're coming back, that could be a little touchy, but I'm not going to get into that, assuming that's not going to happen, since I've been told that Rich has enough funds to cover this. So just so that we understand, this is for information purposes. The main reason that this is here is that this affords us an opportunity to discuss certain things that will be in the fiscal year 24 budget. And it gives us an opportunity to maybe have a better exchange than we will when they're trying to rush through and make time on the budget day, or coming to 2 or 3 different committees and having the same conversation. So that's part of the reason why Duke and I added this to this meeting. We will see this again. It's going to be part of the growth. I'm emphasizing that for Rich's perspective in the budget, because last year we showed core and growth. And even though a position is higher this year, it's not in the prior year's budget. And so it's going to be part of their growth of what's going on. So I just wanted to give that so that everybody understands some of the guidelines of what's going on. And now I'll hand it back over to Dr. Adley.
So this particular position, so this is sort of like, this is not sort of part of the security clearly, right? So it's a separate one, it's a separate item. Clearly our community has suffered several tragic losses, and we continue one day at a time, one step at a time, to get back into a regular process. But that takes a long time, and we continue to be in the post-vention stage. We have worked very closely with the town on this particular position. I want to thank the Board of Education and the members of the community for their support of this position. As we looked at responding and continue to respond on a daily basis and supporting our students and interventions, the administration was asked to bring forward to the table any suggestions that it had in terms of mental health. The board does every couple of months, we have an update at the board level on mental health progress and what we're doing in the schools to support our students and our staff. I would like, since we are on camera, I would like to thank the members of the community on our staff for their support of our students in particular during the past couple of years that have been very, very challenging. So this particular position is a director position in the organization. The direct line of supervision will be to the assistant superintendent for curriculum and supervision and professional development. It addresses a number of issues that you'll see here if you just go through a couple of these, but there are some legislative requirements that we need to be fulfilled. Some of them are being fulfilled at the moment, and some of them are new requirements by the state. So in addition, primarily to provide an overview, a pre-K to 12 coherent response to social and emotional learning, to mental health issues. That's the primary function of the position. But in addition to that, they will also serve some legislative requirements that we have, which includes things like mental health plans that are required for student athletes and the oversight of those, the district safe school climate coordinator, a new family care coordinator that needs to be provided by a district that will play that particular role. So those are only some of the statutory requirements that are necessary, but we're looking at just an overview and a coherent leadership, a program review of mental health, someone who will not just be responsive, hopefully not just responsive to situations, but to be proactive in training our staff and bringing the latest and best programming to our district to support our young people. So this is at a district level position. It will be pre-K to 12. It will work very, very hand in hand and closely with all our mental health professionals, from our social workers, psychologists, and counselors. So we'll be very much integrated into the mental health support of our students. So I won't go through everything here. You will also see what's called up there Tier 1, Tier 2 interventions, and that will be around improving the social and emotional Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions for our students, in addition to the academic Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions. So it'll be, this position also collaborates very, very closely with the town. I want to thank Ali Ranshead, who's the Director of Health Services for the town. Ali actually was, I can share that we have actually just interviewed the finalist. Ali was a part of that, and we'll continue to work closely with the mental health task force that's been established in town. And so there'll be a very close relationship there. This position also will coordinate with outside services and clinical services to provide for our families. There's a huge responsibility to this position. But given the needs of the district, we feel it's important to have someone who is there to proactively work on these issues and make sure that we're providing the best program and support for our students that we possibly can.
Jan, go to the mic if you don't mind.
Yes, this question actually concerns both the mental health thing as well as the security issues that we talked about as well. My question is there a way for students to make an anonymous call to someone, the mental health director or someone else, saying, I'm in trouble, somebody I know is in trouble? And is there a way to do that so the student is comfortable making that call without feeling that there's going to be carryover the next day at lunch?
So I appreciate the question. It's an excellent question, and I actually very much appreciate where it comes from, Jan, the concern to be able to provide information either anonymously or otherwise. The relationships that happen in school, this doesn't take away the infrastructures that we're putting in place and so forth. It is critical that our kids are connected to an adult in the school. Right, that's the same as it was previous years. It's going to be even more important as we move forward. It's important that every student in the system can talk to an adult in the system, either about him or herself or about other students or concern for other students. There are other ways to also consider that moving forward. And one of the things this person will do will also look at these opportunities of there's technology that can be used to anonymously provide information and provide concerns. This is an area where this Director of Mental Health will continue to inform us on the best ways of doing that. But I will say that your administrative staff, your teaching staff are very conscious, have been actually trained in supporting our students and then encouraging our students to pass on concerns either for themselves directly or for other people. We'll continue to look at other ways of making anonymous calls or providing additional information.
Sorry, Jan.
As a follow-up question, is there a way that students can provide information, ask questions or whatever when they're not in school about something that happened in school? So, for example, if a student is at an event where they see something that endangers themselves or someone else, is there a way they can call and leave a message? Is there a way that they can communicate with the people who would be able to help when school is not in session?
So I would say the main areas that we see right now of that happening is the direct contact with or at an event. It might be a coach, it might be someone else, might be an advisor or a program. And all our students have email accounts. For the most part, all our students have email accounts. The younger kids may not use, right? But for the most part, they all have user accounts and email accounts and are very familiar with that system and have done and continue to communicate with teachers and administration through that medium. But we'll continue to look at other methods too.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm not sure what's meant by endangered. I think that could be a variety of things, but perhaps Chief Anderson, you also might be someone to whom someone might want to reach out to, particularly after hours if endangerment is.
Clearly, we do get calls on risky behavior for adults and students on a regular basis. People can reach out to the police department if there's something actively going on that is risky or potentially criminal and or someone in a mental health crisis. And they can do that through our tips off system, which is anonymous. So there is a system to a portal to the police department to report behavior that may need to be investigated right away. As the Board of Education heard from me on numerous occasions now, this is where our school resource officer is so valuable, especially at the high school level. That school resource officer is an on the job at the high school resource for our students. That's the main reason that school resource officer is there. Yes, there's an element of school security involved as well. And as I told the Board of Education and I told the Board of Finance, because of the interventions of our school resource officers over the years, especially since they've been at Darien High School, I can guarantee you there are 2 or 3 now former Darien High School students that are still alive because of the intervention and interest that the school resource officer took on those students. And that's coming directly from them on the import of having a school resource officer there.
Yeah, I'm going to add something else that's a little bit anecdotal. I'm very good friends with a detective in the Stanford Police, now retired, who was the first resource officer at West Hill High School. I can tell you that students, and then became a detective, other things like that, but she was there many years ago. She still has students who she spoke to and counseled as an SRO, calling her today, and they're grown adults. So there is a great deal of value to the SROs and the relationships that they can make with a group of students. But I do think that the TIPS hotline, because we're talking about danger, if somebody's afraid that somebody might have suicidal thoughts, if you call the police, that's not a bad place to start off. You know, I'm not saying that you guys are trained, but you can, it's better than no place.
I should mention that our students are provided with 211 and important numbers that they can call. I should have said that actually outside of normal school hours, that they know where they can reach out and get services again if someone's going to have concerns about themselves or others. Those are the numbers that we continue to publish. We will actually have them as part of some of their swiping systems.
And every high school ID, there is 988. The suicide hotline is on every Darien High School student ID.
I also like that there's been an increase in third-party anonymous firms like Safe to Say Something and Safe to Tell. All of those seem to targeted for this as well. So I think anonymous reporting is a key ingredient to your plan. I didn't see it in your protocols. I just assumed it was part of it. But that's probably the best one of your biggest expenses in prevention.
I do have a financial question. So we have the director of mental health here. We know what their proposed annual budget is. That's the budget for the FTE. What other budget is being assigned to this person to allow them to do all the many things that you mentioned? Because there have to be resources allocated as well for access to studies, business meetings, and the like. So have you come up with an estimate for what you anticipate the incremental costs that were not in the budget for this position?
So currently we don't have incidental costs. I'll call them incidental at the moment, incorporated into this expenditure. We'll continue to look at that, and if it's necessary in the budget, it will show up in the budget.
Okay, fair enough.
Can I just?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I think it's fundamental, and I don't know if this is the time to say this or not. I had a case where a student reached out to my daughter Thanksgiving weekend several years back and told her he was suicidal. And in that moment, we kind of all freaked out, literally. So I called the parents. I talked to the parents, but I also called the school and talked to the guidance council to offer support to my daughter, besides the student, right, that needed help. So I think it's fundamental that one of the things that we do focus as well is, besides the student that is in crisis, is the child that might be informed about the crisis. Because I found when this happened several years back, there was a contact from the guidance council to my daughter, but it was very like light contact. So I just want to bring that up, that this is a very serious issue, and it has arms in many ways, and it touches many people. So I just want to bring that up. I know our mental health director is going to have a ton of work ahead of him, plus whoever he's working with. But there's a lot of things that, need to be taken into consideration. So, and I don't know how you deal with that.
It's complex, and there's no greater priority that we have, or even that the board has moving forward. That's our first, Caroline, that's our first priority, the mental health and the safety of our students.
Are there any other questions, or can we move on to the next issue? I guess we're moving on to the next issue. Let me give you some information on the SSOs. It was in conversations with Duke and Dr. Adley. It was the full intention of the Board of Ed to ask the RTM to address the appropriation. So any comments that the Board of Ed held this from the RTM is an inappropriate comment. The Board of Finance chose for the school, which will cover because they have extra funds, to see what they can fund internally as opposed to bringing the appropriation before the RTM. I've been known not to always agree with Board of Finance decisions. I've been doing this for 20 years, and we have done this practice often for things like costs on special ed, costs on COVID, costs that were out of the control of the Board of Ed when it started. The hiring of essentially 8 FTEs off cycle was something totally within their control. That being said, again, the right to hire those 8 FTEs are fully within the right of the Board of Ed, and they can fund it any way they want, all right? I do want to stress that the Board of Ed was bringing it to us. Board of Finance decision, you don't like the Board of Finance decision, don't take it out on the Board of Ed, all right? I'm being very blunt about that. Even if they brought it to us, if we had voted it down, it doesn't mean they couldn't have hired the people. It's their right. We give them a total appropriation. What our request was is whether or not we're giving them more money, not whether or not we have a say on who they hire. So I understand this is controversial, partly because of how it was being addressed. In this particular case, questions should not be tactical or logistical. This is not the time to say whether or not you like guns or don't like guns. That's not part of this discussion. The RTM, at its meeting on the 12th, the Rules Committee has decided to have a conversation on this so people and the public can voice their opinions. Again, this is not a public hearing. I'm more interested in questions that one might have. You know, as an example, there were several studies that were listed in their September documentation of what they used. But I was wondering if there were other studies that may have had different opinions, because ultimately they said that certain things are inconclusive, hence they had to look at other studies. I haven't read all the studies, by the way. So, you know, if you want to ask what other studies they may have looked at, totally logical. If you want to ask what caliber guns they have, you know, you can ask that privately, not in a public forum. And we're not going into executive session. So I hope that gives a little ground rules for what it is. But I do think that this is important because we're going to see $600,000 of this expense in next year's budget, and it's non-education expense. This isn't as if we're creating new courses. This is a security issue. And if you look over time, it's going to be an expensive, because unless we come up with RoboCops to go around the hallways, this will be here for a while. So I just want to set certain ground rules for, you know, having a positive discussion on this issue. With this, I'll return it to Dr. Adley.
Thank you. For the moment, I'll just hold off on the finances of it and just talk to the program. The board had been in discussion on this concept for a period of time. An executive session as permitted, an executive session under safety and security. I want to, and they were reviewing. This is a complete review of safety and security, but in this particular topic also, and they've worked very, very closely with myself as administration and the police chief in addressing this particular matter. So essentially, the plan would be to put in place 6 different security. School security officers. They're different from a school resource officer that we have at the middle school, and we also have at the high school. So the school security officer essentially would be a retired police officer, either from Darien or from a surrounding town. If you wonder, like, why do you have 6? Since we only have 5 elementary schools. So again, the SROs would still remain at the high school and also at the middle school. The 6th person is, and essentially someone will either be covering for an absence. If you're thinking like at the high school and middle school as an example, I'm thinking you're thinking every day, if you're a parent, there's a school resource officer there. And the police chief does absolutely his best to make sure that every day that there is, he has contractual issues to deal with, there's sickness training. Sometimes we can't get coverage there. And he has liaison people who come up and down. So there may be a day or two that you don't have safety and security in place as much as the plan would suggest you would have in place. So this 6th position would essentially float. If everybody was in school, they would be up at the middle school. That's a huge middle school or high school. There were 1,000 students in each of the schools. That's just a huge, 2 huge campuses with a lot of students there. If somebody was absent at the elementary school, the 6th person would fill in. If somebody was absent at the high school or middle school, the 6th person would fill in. So it's an opportunity to try to cover as many bases reasonably as we can. The school security officer does carry a firearm. I'll let you talk to the police chief about the significance of that or any other details around it. I will say that as the board looked at this and they asked me, one of the questions I had, and I don't want to be inflammatory about it or otherwise, but essentially, as Jack said, the research, the summation of the research is inconclusive. Does it support more safety or does it not in terms of responses and so on? So a couple of things that came to mind that certainly I asked the board just to consider. One was we do have an SRO at the middle school and we do have an SRO at the high school. Now, I think most people, there's lots of different reasons for having SROs. I think most people, most parents probably appreciate that there is a police officer up there, and that police officer has a firearm and will be in close proximity, hopefully, if an event or something happened. My question, and the board considered that too, was, is that not just as important for our elementary students? I don't think you have to have the same model. The board looked at that as to an SRO versus an SSO. I don't think you need to have an SRO at the elementary schools, but I do believe that you should have the same level of security for all our children. If it's no security, then it's none. But if it's some, I think you should at least answer the question: is it not? Are the younger kids not just as clearly? They're just as valuable and important, right? But it should we be providing them with the same level, a similar level of security? And so that was one of the questions that we reflected on and discussed. So these particular positions, there will be still monitors, campus monitors in the schools, so it doesn't replace the campus monitor. The culture and the climate of our schools is extremely, extremely important. And actually, our campus monitors play not only a sort of swiping you in and out and doing that at the front door, but they also play a cultural part with our students, with our staff, with our community, and we don't want to lose that. Also, just having a school's security officer just at the front door is not what we envisage for this particular position. This person will be throughout the school, will be supporting the implementation of our emergency plans, making recommendations and improvements, and making sure things are in place every day regarding safety and security. We'll be outside sometimes, we'll be inside sometimes, we'll be in the major areas of media centers, cafeterias, and the major spaces. So this isn't the reason for doing it either, but there is a level of where people actually feel safer when they have someone in the school. I'm thinking that the reaction time will hopefully be a wee bit in the event of a tragedy should happen, and we clearly don't want to think like that. But at the same time, if something should happen, we have someone there who at least can be immediately responsive to the situation. That's the nature of the program. Those are the personnel that are involved in the program. I guess I'll just talk about Director of Security while I talk about this. So given that we have we get 5 campus managers at the high school, 2 at the middle school, 5 at the elementary school, and then you're going to have school security officers. That's a big oversight. So there is a Director of Security that we're advocating for in the position, and the board has that supported. And this position oversees all the safety and security from our emergency plans to our drills, to suggestion of making improvements, the supervision of all of the staff. So that comes with the position. That's the 7th position, which is the Director of Security. So that's just part of it. If the police chief wants to talk to any part of the program of the school security officers, the training, they have to go through state training. The police will be involved in that training. The police officers, school security officers will also have to participate in all the training, seclusion and restraint training, mandated reported training, bullying training, all of the training that our own staff has to go through to make sure that they can interact and interface with our students and make sure that they're trained appropriately for that. So again, they're opening it up for discussion, or?
Well, tell me, you can kick me under the table if I'm saying something wrong. If you're looking at what's here, the SSOs will be having bulletproof vests. It's my understanding that they will have the same cameras that our police officers have, and it will only be turned on if an incident is occurring. And they will also have, if you watch the cop shows, they always have the little mic here. So that will have access to somebody, because if an incident is happening, and Duke and I had this conversation of who's in charge, and his response was the principal was, because the principal's in charge of that school. My response is the SSO's in charge until the first cop shows up. so that there's no question of what the chain of command is. As soon as those officers are there, quite honestly, I think we'd all want them in charge as opposed to an educated administrator. So are those fair statements? Or
I would say that is a fair characterization. I have a pretty good working relationship with our principals. And I can tell you, as educated and as dedicated as they are to their jobs, they are happy to delegate school security to a trained professional, right? And as I told the Board of Education numerous times, and the Board of Finance as well, I've worked with a lot of police officers in my career here in Darien, over 200 of them actually. And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of police officers across the state of Connecticut. And there's a fair amount of those police officers that I would recommend to the Board of Education to be school security officers here in Darien. There are many that I would not recommend because they would not be a good fit for this position. The way I envision school security officers is to be a fully invested, fully embedded member of that school community. Yes, they're going to offer a level of school security. They are not going to be marching around, barking orders, making kids stay in line and have it like a military camp. They are there to be a resource, but to offer a level of security. They will be trained like a police officer. They've been police officers, just as we know, so we're all clear. The state of Connecticut statute requires that any armed school security officer in the state of Connecticut has to be a Connecticut retired police officer. Were retired in good standing, not under investigation, didn't quit because of malfeasance. They have to be in good standing. And then they're going to have to pass a vetting process to ensure that if we're putting in school security officers, they are going to be the best school security officers that we can get. So yes, they will have a ballistic vest. They will have a body camera. Let me just talk to that briefly. In this day and age, everybody expects all type of authority, governmental authority, especially for police officers or uniformed presence, to have a video of what happened. And if you don't have a video of what happened, they want to know why you don't have a video of what happened. So for the transparency of a school security officer and for accountability purposes, yes, that body camera buffers all the time. It's always on, right? But it's not recording. It is recording. Every 30 seconds, it records over itself. So if there's any thought that we're going to be recording kids in school and we're going to have videos of as we walk, as they walk around, that's not the case. It buffers over on itself every 30 seconds. And when you need to have it on, you can activate it and now it locks in the video. So as far as if you think there's going to be video of children in our schools on a regular basis, if we're going to have huge terabytes of data of our children, that's not the case.
So we're not going to find out who's chewing gum in school.
Yeah. Mr. Davis, if we just I'd like to clarify one thing. Just the principal, he or she, is the incident commander until the police arrive. So the school security officer, I fully expect he or she will be responding to the incident. But then when the police chief or his or her designee arrives, they then take over the incident command. So just technically, I know it might seem semantics a wee bit, but it's important when we're talking about these issues that we clarify the semantics a little bit. The principal's in charge until the police department arrive on site, because these school security officers are employees of the school system, and you'll be expecting them to be responding to the incident at a particular time.
Sure, but go ahead. You're closer, so you go first.
Hi, I'm Christine Castles, Public Health and Safety Committee. So I'm a little bit confused and concerned because, say, for example, we have a psychiatric crisis in the school. Somebody is really having a mental health crisis. Now you're going to have a mental health more people in the school. Now you have the security and the other officers. Now, how are you going to communicate, and what is going to be the role of the psychologists and the other people who are mental health professionals during a psychiatric crisis when the police respond? And who's going to take over? Because I know I work in mental health in the schools up in New Haven. And we have mental health people who are, attend to a student in a mental health crisis. Usually the police are not involved because they're very well trained, and we try to nip things in the bud before somebody really escalates actually into that, crisis. But in the event that it does, I'm concerned that the police officer, even if a student is charging at them because they're in crisis, that the child doesn't get shot, and so I want to, that's what my big concern.
All right, why don't we let them respond?
Well, our mental health professionals have delineated what their responsibilities are in our emergency plans. But in regards to the police officer being involved, again, that is why the police officer or the SSO will go through our training and all the appropriate training in dealing with students with needs, mental health needs, or otherwise. And responding to different situations. I can understand the concern, because as soon as you put a firearm in the school, you could say it raises the risk of something. But these are trained police officers. They admittedly they're retired police officers. This is supported through the State Department of Education. It's also supported through the state of Connecticut and supporting these particular positions. So they have responsibilities and so on that go along with that. But we will do everything we can through training, through communication, and ongoing collaboration with the police chief and our director of security to ensure that we don't want any incidents to happen of any particular nature. So I appreciate the concern, and I appreciate the articulation of the concern for the students. That's something that we are very, very conscious of. It's something the board's conscious of. It's something administratively we're conscious of. It's one of the reasons why I feel comfortable actually putting in place. There may be situations where I wouldn't feel comfortable putting them in our schools. Our relationships and our practices with our police officers have been exemplary. That's not the way students are treated either at the middle school or high school. We have a good track record of de-escalating, escalating. So that's I'm very, very. In fact, if you were reading literature, the interactions between school security officers or school resource officers, one of the reasons not to have them is because they have negative interactions with kids, whether it's actually physical or whether it's mental health or otherwise. That's not the case. That's not our experience here with our police department. If it was, honestly, I wouldn't put them in if I had that fear. But I definitely appreciate the concern expressed.
Can I ask a follow-up? And I'm also going to make a question to exactly that point. Dealing with mental health issues on police departments has become a significant event in the last, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years. It's probably much longer, but it's been in the public eye. Although they're much larger police forces, and Kate Bush may not be happy with what I'm saying because it'll add to your budget. Stanford and Norwalk added someone who's trained in mental health to their police departments using their ARPA funding, and will continue with that post ARPA. So, but can you explain a little bit, because I know we do a lot of training on that, how our police people are trained on dealing with mental health issues?
Not every one of our officers, but most of our patrol officers are CIT trained, for crisis intervention training. Our general orders require that any incident where someone is in a mental health crisis, if one of those officers is on duty, and I can effectively tell you 365 days a year, 3 shifts, one of those officers at least is on duty. They are required to be sent to that call. We're talking about SSOs now for retired officers. I do not, our SROs, I think in the 8 years or 9 years they've been at the high school and 3 years that they've been at the middle school, I'm not aware of we've ever had an interaction with a student where we had to put our hands on a student. That's not what we do. And the standard of an SSO or a police officer is not going to change as far as any physicality with a student. That's not our main role there. There are people much better suited and trained to handle something like that. We're not clinicians. We're not mental health professionals, but we see enough of it that we know it when we see it. And our officers, and I think our SSOs for the town of Darien, will be trained to a standard to recognize who is the best person to handle an issue in the school. And often it's not going to be the SSO or a police officer responding there. So yeah, you're there as a backup if need be, but I just don't see that we're going to have interactions of negative implications with students. And typically what I have seen that a lot of people and students that are maybe a little bit out of the mainstream, that somebody like an SSO or a police officer, they're their best friend. And that's kind of what I want to see happen in the school. I want the officer to be invited to birthday parties and weddings at some point, right? That's the way I see it, that I think the SSOs can be part of the school system. I just don't see that there's going to be negative interactions with students.
I'm going to make a little comment. I'm very happy. One of my concerns is if you're reading the difference between an SRO and an SSO in its definitions, is an SRO is by definition more involved in the community, and an SSO was not by definition. I am happy to hear, because that was one of my concerns, that I believe that any figure of authority, if you want to call it that, is involved in that school. And I would, and I hope this isn't a logistical question, but I would imagine that people are going to be in the same school. You know, once you hire somebody, that for the most part, they're going to be in that community for the school year. Okay, all right. Next question. Go ahead.
Following up on that point, I'm concerned about the model of the floating SSO for exactly this reason, that it's difficult to build a relationship, especially if you're moving between an elementary population and a middle school or a high school population. There are 1,100 students at the middle school, around 1,400 at the high school. If you're accustomed to dealing with elementary school sized students, it's quite a switch. So that concerns me. And as part of that also, on the slide before this one that is headed the role of school security officers, it mentions that SSOs will provide security for school-sponsored and non-school sponsored events. Are these only during school hours or in the evenings? And is this overtime, or would we take a student, an SSO away from a daytime duty to cover something that takes place after school? And how is that funded? And how do we keep that sense of community of the SSO being connected to the specific student body that they're with? Thank you.
That's a Board of Ed question.
Well, thank you, Jackie. We certainly wouldn't take the SSO out of the school day to perform some other function. That wouldn't happen. Like staff, like teaching staff, it's very difficult to get, and the police chief does a super job as much as he can in terms of making sure that we have supervision for some of our evening activities or for some of the events that happen. I don't know, take the carnival or otherwise. These positions could also serve in the capacity of overseeing these particular events. Yes, that would be additional. That's additional above and beyond what the position currently calls for. But there will be a need, and I think they'll be utilized in that particular capacity. While I recognize the difference between the age levels, I don't think that we'll try to provide as much continuity as we possibly can between sending schools or otherwise. But the idea of the floater not being able to work with the elementary school kids as well as the middle school, I understand that there's a difference. There's a reason why teachers have different certifications and so on and so forth. But I don't see that as inhibiting the model of implementation. I think that they will be able to transition between an elementary school and a middle school. I just have a respectful difference of opinion on that matter.
Would you consider the floater, because I think it's a very interesting point raised. Would you consider the floater periodically showing up, even when the SSO is at, like Oxridge, So they're there, but would you maybe once a week, they go to each different school to walk the school, be around with that SSO, just so that they're familiar with the school itself, some of the people and other things like that?
Oh, let me be clear. We're going to have to make sure that there is a level of comfort and familiarity with the schools. This continues a wee bit of a work in progress. We're continuing to work on their orientation plans for the school security officers. The point is a extremely valuable point, and we'll continue to provide experiences, and we'll learn as we go and make adjustments as we go in terms of what works and what will facilitate that transition as easily or as quickly as possible. And I think we will learn, like from people's observations, from feedback, and we'll take that into account as we move forward.
Alan, you might want to just describe where we derive the model from. You looked hard at Newtown School District.
Oh yes, we adopted Newtown to look at their particular model. I will share with you that there's lots of school districts now looking at this particular model now that has been on discussion here in Darien. In all honesty, they're looking at their particular models and trying to do something similar. But we were up. Mr. Riddle and I went up to Newtown and spent time there with their director of security and did an overview of their security, the procedures and so on they had in place. And this is one of the models that they had in place.
Yeah, before you go, Teresa, will the director of security also be a former police officer?
May or may not be, depending on his or her experiences.
Okay.
Teresa Vogt, Education Committee. I guess a couple of things I've been thinking about on this is the SRO model. Those are police officers. They are in your budget. They answer to you. And I think what I struggle with on the SSO position is they will be answering to our finance director. I'm listening to you tonight. I'm listening to Chief Anderson with his expertise. And I just struggle with the fact that the SSOs are not in his budget and they are not reporting to him, who is the security expert. With all due respect, Rich, you're a finance expert. So that's one comment. Then my next would be looking further into our budgets. We're talking, to Jack's point, we are talking about a big increase in our school budget for something that's not educational. So, I mean, I would hope that going forward, when you present your budget and we are looking at the increase, that we have to look at the increase X the school security officers, because I don't want to see anything educational getting cut because of these SSO positions and keeping the budget down as people would want it to be. And I guess my third point is in terms of the transfer, I just want you all to make sure, I mean, it's already happened, as I know, that there are probably going to be some special ed costs coming down the road because we are not giving services to kids because of a lack of staff, and we are going to have to service those kids. That's the law. And we are going to have to fund it somehow, be it through private things that parents do that we will have to fund, or something in the summer that'll cost more than we originally budgeted for. So I just want to make sure that's all taken into consideration. Thanks.
Thank you, Teresa. The director of security oversees the school security officers. Yes, the line item beyond that then goes to Mr. Riddle. And that's essentially just the way the operations work in the school district at central services level. Somebody always reports to central services, but invariably the director of security will be the person who will be overseeing the school's security officers, and the police chief will be overseeing the SROs as he does now. We also have a memorandum of understanding between SROs and how they work and the SSOs how they work. It is critical that the director of security has the expertise to supervise and bring that level of expertise that Teresa's just talking about. So the board will be interviewing that person to make sure that we get a highly qualified person who has the qualifications to provide that level of supervision.
I want to add one other thing, Teresa. This is not going to be a year where we have a small budget increase. SSOs or not SSOs. I've already gone through what I know is coming down the road. A larger Oxbridge school, a new custodian there. The stock market did not do well this year, so all the pension costs are going to be going up. Last I checked, gas, oil, water, and fuel costs are up. The teacher's contract, which I'm assuming we'll see in either January or February, was done with some mediation and other things like that, and is somewhat consistent with what I understand other school districts are going. It is not going to be a budget year that any of us are going to like when we hear the numbers. It's just, but that's why it's important, and Rich and Dr. Adley and Duke are talking about what is the increase in our core business, and that includes having more special ed students and other things like that, and what's the actual growth areas. If we're adding another custodian, as was discussed last year at Oxbridge, those are going to be in growth. This will be in growth. The director of special mental health will be in growth. So that will help us understand the budget better, and hopefully will allow the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen is going to be doing the same thing, explain their budget better. Sorry.
No. Hi, Katie Ivanovich, Public Health and Safety. Thank you for everything tonight. It actually answered quite a few of my questions before I had to come up here and ask them. Especially Chief Anderson, I felt much more comfortable with a lot of things this evening. First, I just want to say I fully understand that there's the right to hire based on what the budget is, any FTE you like. But respectfully, these are not normal FTEs. So it's going to be a discussion, and guns are not a normal thing that we're putting into the school. So it's always going to be a concern of many parents, including me. I understand this is going to happen either way, whether we have concerns or not. So really, I want to concentrate on who the people are that we're going to be putting into the schools with our youngest and most impressionable students. I've heard a lot about training, and there's a lot of things that were thrown out here, but our teachers are a certain type of people that are working with our youngest students. They were made to do this, to be working with these young students. And it is my concern. And I felt more comfortable when you spoke of, police officers who should not be doing this type of role and those who should be. And I think that has to be very well established in this role, that this needs to be an individual that's going to be working with very young children. In particular, I have identical twins in one of the elementary schools, and one is probably going to think it's pretty cool that there is a police officer, and one is going to actually be very, very anxious that even if he is a perfect child, there is somebody who's going to be watching who has a gun, and is he going to be in trouble? And I think we need to be aware that that is a child who has normal anxiety, and we're not talking about special needs, somebody who has mental health issues that need to be addressed. So my question really is, what is the relationship of these individuals going to be with the campus school monitors, with the principal, with the staff, as well as what is the training going to be? Are these individuals who have worked with young people before? And I'm saying young people, not necessarily high school age, young students as young as 4, my kids when they started kindergarten. And how active are they going to be within the community on a day-to-day basis? Is it going to be blending into the background? Because when I read that they're going to be doing lunch supervision and dismissal of students, that's something that gives me pause. I want them to be incorporated so they feel comfortable, but at the same time, not that they feel there's this presence and maybe there's a danger that they weren't aware of, that they were in their blissful bubble before this police officer is there on a daily basis. So that's really what I wanted to hear a bit more about from both you, Dr. Adley, and you, Chief Anderson.
Can you just remind me of your name, sorry?
Katie.
Katie, sorry. Thank you, Katie. Thank you very much. I appreciate that concern too. These are all real concerns, right? I will say this too, by the way. Invariably, I'd like to be in a position of not even recommending this, to be honest with you, right? I'm off at this position. I wish there weren't guns in schools, and all due respect to the police chief and so on. That's just where I come from. But my responsibility is to provide recommendations to the board and the community on what I think is best. And that is what we think is best at this particular time. The chief will be involved in all the interviews of the director of security and the SSOs. So we will be looking for the qualities, both from a police perspective and also from the experiences. The person who's going to bring the technical experiences. We also want to look at the adaptive experiences and experiences that have working with young people, or their suitability to these particular positions, no matter whether you're a teacher or whatever other profession you're in. Invariably, it comes down to the actual person that we hire and the qualities of that particular person, he or she. And we'll be looking for those particular qualities and following up with the trainings regarding how to interact with students, and in addition to providing the mandated trainings that we need to provide. So it's going to be an ongoing process of doing that. We have committed to that we will have meetings at each of the schools prior, well in advance of starting this with our communities and our parents to engage in those conversations and to share what those rollouts will actually look like. But we're very conscious of those issues, and we'll continue to work at them, and appreciate your concern. The issues that you present, it is extremely important that we have the right people, whether from a police point of view or from working with a children point of view. And I respect that your children, our children can be different, right? Dramatically different. Sometimes for own families, it's like those two boys from my own family, they're all completely night and day and have different needs. And that has continued to be a theme that I've heard of, like, how are we addressing that? And we are going to address it directly. And so that's all I can share with you, that we are definitely addressing it through our own training, through the training that the police gives, and we'll be looking at the qualities through the interview process.
Before anybody else goes, there is one thing I did want to do, and I'm glad that you sort of mentioned it. When this first started coming out, my association, we had a little Halloween thing for the kids, and I asked the parents, what did they think about it? I mean, my kids are all older. What I think doesn't really matter. I don't have kids there anymore. And my grandkids aren't in this school system. They're not in any school system right now. So I asked them, and everybody said, what are you talking about? And this is for homes in Oxridge, and I know those principals. I know they are great communicators. And I understand, and I mentioned it to Duke, and Duke said, well, this has been mentioned. So I do understand that parents who are raising kids and going through a pandemic and everything else like that may not have been reading all of the emails that the school has sent out. I'm not questioning whether or not you did, but I think it's very important that a communication goes on, almost very similar to the meeting we're having here, so that questions can be answered, people can answer things, and there can be a certain comfort level. And I know that there's a new communications committee on the board, although I haven't paid attention to what their role is. But that's something that is a concern, but it was good to hear it. I just wanted to put it out there that the parents that I spoke to thought I had two heads besides the other things that I do.
I also want to just recognize that something, and I haven't the solution to this, right? But we've identified also, how are we expressing this to the children? Not just happening, and how are we expressing it to the community? How are we actually explaining it to our students in the classrooms? So we've identified that. We know we're going to work on that. I don't have the solution to that right now, but I certainly have identified that as that's an integral part, another part of the communication and also the implementation of it.
Hi, I'm Clara Sartori. I think I have an easy question for you. Will the administration and board establish confidentiality protocols, and will the people who are working in the schools be expected to follow them or sign them?
Well, the school security officer will be school employees, so they have to adhere to all the policies and practices and confidentiality requirements of the district.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Hi, Jan Raymond again. I have two completely unrelated questions to ask you. The first one is, before I came here tonight, I heard that there was a class action suit filed in Uvalde for $27 billion. And I'm wondering, is there an exposure to our Board of Ed, and what can be done to be sure that that doesn't happen? Not that I think we're Uvalde, but I think you understand that question.
I didn't get all of it, Jan, but I got the sense of exposure and liability.
Yeah.
And we have worked with our insurance company to Comm to ensure that we can proceed with this particular model.
I think that's about the extent that we can answer on that.
Yeah.
Because the board's attorney is not here to answer. I would not want anyone to give legal advice who is not an attorney.
The other question I had was, Chief Anderson, you described the camera and the bulletproof vest and everything that the officers would wear when they're in the school, and all of that will be visible to the students. And I'm wondering whether or not the weapon will also be visible to the students during a regular day.
That ultimately is going to be a Board of Education decision as far as uniform of the day, whether it's exposed or not. That's still in discussion with the board. From my perspective, and if anyone here who has grade school students, you could talk to teachers or campus monitors or principals at schools, that we're in those schools on a regular basis. Now, I am in the schools personally there. I'm the mystery reader. I'm sitting down on the carpet for, snack time. Last week at Oxbridge, I did a journalism interview where the kids had to interview somebody and do a journalism story. So again, this is just my perspective that I get it. The argument for and pro and con on firearms, I understand where both sides of the aisle come from on this. But I can tell you that it has not been a problem, and our officers are in the schools on a regular basis already. Now, as far as the uniform goes, that's still in discussion of what they're going to look like. It's not going to look like this. Mm-hmm. It's going to be something different than a police officer for sure. Our SROs don't wear this uniform. They wear a more business casual uniform, certainly still identifying them as someone in authority. It's just not somebody that walked in off the street, but it's not the typical uniform.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Just to be clear, when you're in the school reading, where you're dressed in full dress with your sidearm.
When I'm at a school, when it's on a regular basis, or my school's liaison officers who are there, not every day, but most days, they're going into schools and interacting with students and passing in the hallway with administrators, with teachers, with campus monitors. This is it. This is our uniform of the day. It's not unusual, I think, at this point. And I just don't think it's when someone sees a police officer in our schools that they automatically think that there's a problem. I don't think that's the mindset, the way we built it, where we are part of the community and we're not only there when there's an issue. We're there before there are any issues, or just being a member of the community.
Or reading to children.
Or being the mystery reader.
Hi, I'm Lois Schneider. I'd like to follow up with this is a difficult question, but I'm really interested in it. The whole point of this whole thing is that, God forbid, something happens in our school, because we've covered very effectively having these people in the schools, the goods they can do and things like that. So I'm curious about the research that you've done, because I understand that the research that you found has been inconclusive on how effective SSOs would be in the schools. And I understand that we're going to be very careful on who we hire. But I'm sort of bluntly saying, how do we know, or what can we do to assure that the people that we're bringing in, that we're hiring, will go towards the problem and not away from the problem. Because my naive idea on what I've read is that when they're, quote, not effective, is because they don't go towards the problem. So I appreciate your comments on how we can make this effective.
I'm happy to answer that, because although
you are answering that, you.
although I would be advisory to the Board of Education and their selection process, I will be involved in it. The town of Darien has a proven track record of hiring competent professional police officers, and the ones that don't meet the spec are separated from the service. And I would expect nothing less for school security officers for the Board of Education. There will not be a hire if this moves forward. I would recommend, if I'm involved in the interview process, of anyone that I had even a scintilla of hesitancy that they would not do what they're there to do. I can assure you that the names that I have and the faces I have as potential staff members to fill these positions, I would guarantee you, and I would bet my badge, that they will not shirk their responsibility, as we've seen has happened across the country. So if you want to take that to the bank, that's my guarantee, the best that I can give you, that I think that we will have a qualified pool of applicants that are going to have the bifurcated approach to be school security officer having, you know, a taco with a student and talking about what happened with them over the weekend. And then if something happens that they need to address, it will be addressed from that perspective, and be able to, maybe even more so than a police officer, be able to go back between those roles seamlessly, as to not be seen as, you know, the RoboCop. That's not what they're there for.
If I can add to something, a number of years ago, I was listening to an interview. Chief Kelly was one of the speakers there, and there was another one from Los Angeles, and they were talking about who they hire for police officers. And they said the ones that said, "I'm here to fight crime," they had concerns about. The ones that say, "I want to give back to my community," were the ones who were good cops. And so if you look at the Darien police force, which looks to not only protect us, but also to participate in being good citizens here, I think that's a very important aspect of who we are as a community. And, you know, obviously, Chief, yourself and your predecessors all have had a long history of that. And I think that's important for us to remember.
Louis, if you'd like me to get the research, I can point you to where it is. But the synthesis of it is that it's inconclusive.
Yeah. Jenny, you had a question?
For Rich, if maybe just for the benefit of everybody here who may not know, and I don't know the details, can you give me a breakdown of the number of campus monitors, SROs, SSOs, just the number, school liaisons, and the number of staff that we have now in place, will have in place as a result of this for our security program?
So there's, for Board of Ed employees, so excluding police,
yeah.
There's 18 employees plus the Director of Security, so 12 campus monitors, 6 SSOs, and then the Director of Security. So 18 plus the Director makes 19. There are 2 SROs in the district, which are police department employees, one at the high school and one at the middle school. And then each elementary school has a police liaison officer that the chief offers, that are also police officers.
That does not include, which currently at least is in the police department, the crossing guards that are also interact with our students.
How many are those?
I don't know.
I think it's 8.
Thank you.
Hi, if I can, Peter Marushek, Education. I just want to thank you. I think this program would save lives, and it's 10 years next week since the terrible day at Sandy Hook. So I'm glad that we are here sort of talking about it, and on the 12th, hopefully approving it. So thanks everybody around this table. I have 3 sort of comments around the design of the program. One is the chain of command, and I know it's been discussed a little bit. Jack has one opinion. You mentioned with the state template to incident suggest to do. And it's surprising to me that even though we have the SSOs, which are hired specifically for this purpose when the accident happens, that the principal of the school is in charge. So, it's probably a technical question that maybe not discussed publicly, but if it's something that maybe you and Chief Anderson can discuss whether the state template actually makes sense or whether we should do it otherwise. The second thing is the hiring, and I know there was a lot of questions about who going to be these people, and I would urge the board and also you, Dr. Adley, to make sure we have a process in place where we not only, obviously with Chief Anderson, not only go through the initial, but also ongoing control, ongoing checkup with these people, right? Obviously the bad apple risk, where people going to be with guns around our kids and go through problems like all of us go. Something that happens is obviously real. So I don't know if it's a quarterly checkup with these people or annual, but I would urge that. And then I have just a small technical question, perhaps for Mr. Rudel, is I noticed in the materials you just provided today is the pension options that we have for these folks. And I know the corporate America and most of America is moving away from pension to 401k and defined contribution programs. And I noticed that we do plan to have the SSOs follow that system, but for the director of security, we would like to give him pension. I just would like to understand why do we do that and whether it's the most wise course of action. Thanks.
So primarily it's because there'd be a strong potential to lose right now who are our top candidates for those positions.
This top candidate requires it. That's what does. Yes. Okay.
Just as a follow-up on the town side, we are moving all of our town employees. We did in 3 stages. We capped the pension. Then we had a year where we didn't do anything to pensions. It's every 3 years. And now, as we're now moving through the 7 unions in the town side, we are keeping those who have a defined benefit plan in their defined benefit plan, but all new employees are going into a defined contribution plan where they have to contribute a certain percentage of their salary, and their vesting is a 5-year cliff vesting, which means you don't own what the town contributed until you've been there at least 5 years. I am assuming that if anything's following the town pension plans, that's what they will be going in for new hires. I cannot answer what you're going to do with the SSOs because they may be different than your other ones.
The SSOs, I think it's a 401A plan,
yeah.
And the 2 director positions would be in the town pension plan.
Okay. So just so everybody understands that little nuance.
Hi, Renato Mittner, FNB. I have 2 questions. The first one is probably for my own benefits to understand the difference between the CSOs and the CROs. And that would then lead into my second question. What was our rationale for asking for 6 CSOs, which I understand 5 are dedicated to each one of our grammar schools and 1's supposed to be an alternate? Why wouldn't we have 1 at the middle school? Why wouldn't we have 1 at the high school? Or vice versa? Why wouldn't we have 2 CSOs at 1 at the middle school, 1 at the high school, and then 5 CROs in the grammar schools? But first, understanding the difference between those 2 roles.
So I just want to make sure that I understand the question in terms of the middle school and the high school. I'll say the difference first of all. The SROs at the high school and the middle school, I honestly didn't think we needed to have SROs at the elementary school. Because the SRO roles at the middle school and high school are different. They're counseling roles. They're also teaching roles in some cases, where they go in and teach various classes and so on. And they're also police department employees. They get a call, they may have to even leave the high school, right? If there's a community incident or otherwise. The SSOs, it was a less expensive model. And I don't think it's necessary to have that expense given what we're trying to do with this, which is provide primarily a level of security and first response.
So the SROs are not carrying any weapons?
Oh, yeah. The SROs are, yes.
They are as well.
The SROs do,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The SROs perform a dual role at our middle school and our high school. They are there for an element of security, of course, but they are there even more so as a administrative type role. They are mentors toward the kids. And let's face it, as I told the Board of Ed in previous meetings, thankfully, our elementary school children, most of them are not dealing with some of the issues that they have in the middle school and moving into the high school. Just life changes, and it's just a different paradigm with elementary school kids and high school kids. Much more of a mentor type position and a role model and a resource. Thankfully, our elementary school kids, for the most part, hopefully they're still playing with Barbies and playing baseball after school, and they're not dealing with issues that some middle school and high school kids are dealing with.
Or during World Cup, they're playing soccer or football.
Again, just one quick question. Is Fitch Academy covered with these SSO and SROs, or is that another configuration of security? Or
that comes with another configuration of security. Those are not in the school buildings. That's in a different location, and there's approximately about 17 students involved in there.
Yeah, and so are they going to have some officer there or something at Fitch Academy?
So we would provide our intention in that particular would provide intermittent, more of a liaison type response, given the location, given the size, given the number of students.
All right, thank you.
One other thing, because I know a lot of people have mentioned to me, I really would prefer that instead of it being an SSO, that we have an SRO. Currently in this country, and forget about techs with the special H visas, it is very difficult to find police officers, very difficult to find teachers, very difficult to find truck drivers. And by the way, if you're an A-type mechanic, auto mechanic, or a diesel mechanic, you can basically write your own ticket. So, I mean, it is not easy. A lot of people retired or left the profession in law enforcement.
I have a question. Will the elementary schools continue to have the Darien police officer liaison officers once the SSOs are in place?
They absolutely will.
Thank
you. One more question regarding the hardware of the doors. Will those at the elementary school now meet the standards that we have at the middle school and high school, or how do they compare?
We will actually make improvements at the high school and the middle school, in addition to the elementary schools.
They don't. Then at the end, they will all 7 schools.
Yes, correct. That's the intention. Yes, and that's the same over at Fitch.
If there's no more questions, I would like to have, because there was some conversation. For a number of reasons, some of it was good, some of it was bad because we had more in our budget than what we were capped at. The excess cost reimbursement, which is a reimbursement of special ed expenses, we're getting more than in our budget. That is not detracting from any expenses being spent in special ed. That is a contra expense account. And it has never stopped us spending what we're supposed to be spending on special ed. But I would like Rich to explain some of the finances and what the current budget is showing, and go from there. If you don't mind, if we move to the next part of this meeting, because it was supposed to be an hour, but it's been a very good conversation. So I appreciate Dr. Adley and Chief Anderson hanging out with us, and Marge too.
So overall, we are expecting to have about a $600,000 positive balance for the year, and that includes the cost for the SSOs. The board did approve transfers to fund those SSOs at the last meeting. And those primarily came from 3 sections that had less enrollment at the elementary schools than we anticipated, including health insurance for those positions. That's almost about $250,000, or almost the entire amount that the board had to approve. We also, through negotiations, had a new salary schedule for our custodian and maintenance employees. And so any employee hired after July 1st goes with a new salary schedule. At the time of the transfer, we had about 3 employees, and it netted a savings of a little over $50,000. We now actually have a 4th employee on it, so that'll be about $65,000 in total for the year. And then in terms of excess costs, we did budget a threshold. So the state has a 4.5 times your per pupil threshold before you actually get reimbursed. We did budget $109,966. And so that was the anticipated threshold of what we'd have to reach before we get reimbursement. So usually at the end of October, the state sets what your 4.5 threshold is and your per pupil cost. So ours came in at $104,310. One of the primary reasons for it being lower is our enrollment was less than anticipated. And then some of our federal grants with the timing of when it was expensed impacted that per pupil cost. And so what we're seeing is we're picking up about $5,500 for every claim that we submitted. And so by picking up $5,500 across 50 plus claims, we're picking up about $330,000. And we also have about another dozen or so claims that we're able to submit. Part of it is claims that we couldn't submit before because we thought our threshold was going to be higher. So they're small claims, and some are just new claims for services that happen for students that needed those services. On the flip side, during the state legislature, they adopted a change in excess costs in which it used to be that all the districts would submit their claims for the year. They would see how much money they had, and then they would create a percentage that they would then reimburse all the districts throughout the state. Typically, it floated anywhere from 65% to 80%. So last year, as an example, we were just over 80%. Now they're tiering it by town wealth. Darien is in the top 3 in town wealth, and so we are at 70% is what our cap is. And so we had budgeted 75%, so we're actually going to see 70%. So that's actually a loss in revenue. And so while it's a $500,000 swing, it's about a $378,000 net positive to our budget. As Jack mentioned, it's not a, it is a grant that is a partial reimbursement for expenditures that you actually make. And so the first filing we have is actually tomorrow. So we plan on filing that tomorrow. And that really reflects your expenses that you've had to date and that what you anticipate spending through the end of the year. And then you do another filing on March 1st, which picks up the expenses through essentially March 1st, and then what you expect to spend from March to the end of June. We get reimbursed, a first chunk of reimbursement, 75% of that reimbursement in February, at the end of February, and then we get the balance in May. And then typically what happens is when we get audited every year, which is a requirement by the state, they'll make any adjustments that may or may not have to happen because things might have changed from your March projection through June, whether it's maybe a student who moved out, a student who moved in, a student who didn't attend all the days, whatever it might be. And then that adjustment, whether positive or negative, gets attached to the town's ECS funds. So while we haven't actually received the money yet, we do anticipate receiving about $370,000 more, and it's largely because of the threshold change.
And just to the educational cost sharing, because it comes after June 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year, and schools are not allowed, other than some minor grants and other things like that, are not allowed to have carryover budgets. So it goes into the town budget. And some years with that audit, we've seen the ECS go up because we've gotten more money. Other times we see minor adjustments going down. But overall, it pretty much evens out over the year. So that's just to understand that we'll see in other revenues on the town side. And even though it's directly related to the school, and if you look at Rich's reports, when he's showing the budget, you'll see him pull it back in a little bit to say, here's what we really had in this amount for what's going on, which is appropriate. It's just doesn't matter because it's all going into the same account. So are there any questions on the finances?
I have one more question. Is it correct that the security officers do not take direction from the chief of police, whilst the relationship officers do?
The school security officers will take their direction from the director of security.
Okay. Until such time there's an incident. At that time, the SSO is part of the task force addressing the incident. And if the police are running it, that's who they're taking their orders from.
Rich, a quick question. What's the cost for the training for the SSOs? Where is that coming from? And what can we expect budget-wise for that?
Sure. So the district has an account in RC 18 called staff development. It has about $26,000 and it's used for non-certified staff training. So we expect to tap into that for the training. So the school security officers are required to get what's called a post fee. So they do have to register with the state. They do have to do firearm training with the police department. And then they're going to get all the same training that a certified or a non-certified staff would get here, whether it's PMT training or, seclusion training or any other training that we have.
And 26,000 is enough for all of that?
Yep.
Yeah.
We need some information about that coaching that you guys get, because it sounds low to me.
Are there any more questions? I'd like to thank Chief Anderson, Dr. Adley, the board members that showed up, Marge, Rich, and the members of the committee. I hope that you found this to be informative. We will be, as soon as we have a copy of this, we will be distributing it to all RTM members. But again, thank you very much for spending your time with us. And thank you all for being here. And with that, this meeting is over.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you.